The needle slipped between Evangeline's ribs like a whisper, barely a pinch before the world tilted sideways. She jerked awake on the subway seat, heart hammering against her chest, but her limbs felt heavy as concrete. The man beside her, dark suit, expensive watch, kept his eyes forward while his hand retreated to his lap. "What did you?" The words slurred together like melted wax. Her tongue wouldn't obey, and panic clawed up her throat. "Sleep," he said quietly, and his voice carried the weight of authority. "It's better if you sleep." The train car swayed around them, nearly empty at this late hour. A homeless man dozed 3 seats down, and a woman in scrubs stared at her phone near the doors. Normal people living normal lives while something very wrong was happening to her. Evangeline tried to stand, but her legs buckled. The stranger's arm shot out to steady her, and she found herself pressed against his shoulder, solid, warm, smelling faintly of cedar and something darker. "Let me go." The words came out as barely a whisper. "I'm afraid I can't do that." His fingers tightened on her arm, not painful, but firm enough to make his point clear. "You're in more danger than you realize, Miss Thorne." The sound of her name from his lips sent ice through her veins. She'd never seen this man before in her life. 22 years at St. Catherine's Convent in Vermont, and the only strangers she'd ever encountered were delivery drivers and the occasional lost tourist. Yet here he sat, knowing exactly who she was. "How do you know my name?" She fought to keep her eyes open, but the chemical warmth spreading through her system made everything soft around the edges. "Your Aunt Celeste told me you'd be coming." His voice held something that might have been regret. "She told me a lot of things about you." Aunt Celeste, the woman who'd sent the letter 3 weeks ago, asking Evangeline to come to New York after Sister Margaret's death. The only family she had left in the world, and the reason she'd left the only home she'd ever known. The train lurched to a stop, and she realized with growing horror that this wasn't her station. She was supposed to get off at 42nd Street, but through the grimy windows, she could see this was somewhere else entirely. "This isn't." Her head lolled to the side despite her efforts to stay upright. "No, it's not." He stood, pulling her up with him. To anyone watching, it would look like he was helping an exhausted girlfriend off the train. "But where we're going is much safer than where you were headed." The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. He guided her toward them, one arm around her waist, the other gripping her elbow. Her feet moved, but she wasn't sure if it was her own doing or if he was simply carrying her forward. "I don't understand." The platform stretched before them, mostly empty except for a few late commuters hurrying toward other trains. "Why would Aunt Celeste?" "Because she owes me a debt." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "And you're going to help me collect it." They walked toward the exit, her legs working on autopilot while her mind screamed warnings she couldn't act on. The world had taken on a dreamlike quality, everything slightly out of focus, sounds muffled as if she were underwater. A black car waited at the curb, engine running. The driver's window was tinted too dark to see inside, but the rear door opened as they approached. "Please." She tried once more to pull away, but her body betrayed her. "I don't know anything about a debt. I just want to find my aunt." "You will." He helped her into the car, sliding in beside her as the door closed with a soft click. "But first, we need to have a conversation about what your family really is." The leather seats were too soft, too warm. She sank into them as the car pulled away from the curb, carrying her deeper into the city and further from any chance of escape. Through the window, New York's lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, beautiful and terrifying. "My family." Her voice sounded far away, even to her own ears. "I don't have a family, just Aunt Celeste, and I've never even met her." "That's what they told you." His fingers drummed against his thigh, a rhythmic tapping that somehow made her skin crawl. But lies have a way of catching up with people, especially when those lies involve $20 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. $20 million. More money than she'd ever imagined existing, let alone having any connection to her life. That's impossible. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Why had Sister Margaret never talked about her family? Why had all her questions about her parents been met with gentle deflections and changes of subject? "Is it?" He turned to look at her fully for the first time, and she saw his eyes were the color of storm clouds. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, what do you actually know about where you came from?" The question hung in the air between them as the car glided through the streets. carrying her toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Evangeline woke to the sound of crystal singing against crystal. Her eyelids felt weighted with lead, but she forced them open to find herself in a room that belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan's skyline stretching endlessly beyond, while morning light streamed across marble floors and cream-colored furniture that probably cost more than most people made in a year. She sat up too quickly, and the world tilted. The clothes she'd worn on the train, a simple blue dress from the convent's donation box, were gone. In their place, she wore silk pajamas and deep emerald that felt like water against her skin. The crystal sound came again, and she turned to see him standing near a bar cart, stirring something in a glass tumbler. In daylight, he looked different. Younger, maybe 30, with dark hair that suggested he'd run his fingers through it more than once. His white dress shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, and his tie hung loose around his neck as if he'd been up all night. "Good morning, Miss Thorne." He didn't look at her as he spoke. "I trust you slept well. Where are my clothes?" Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "Being cleaned. Helena thought you might be more comfortable in something that actually fit." He gestured toward a woman who materialized from what must have been a walk-in closet. Mid-40s, perfectly pressed black uniform, the kind of neutral expression that came from years of working for people who could afford to buy silence. "Helena is my housekeeper," he continued. "She's prepared breakfast, and there are clothes in your size hanging in the wardrobe. We'll be having visitors later, so I suggest you make yourself presentable." Evangeline swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her balance. The drug had mostly worn off, leaving her with a headache and a mouth that tasted like copper pennies. "Visitors? Business associates. They're very interested in meeting you." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. "But first, we should probably introduce ourselves properly. Darius Ashford." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it suggested it should. She stood, pleased when her legs held her weight, and walked to the windows. Central Park spread out below them, which meant they were somewhere on the Upper East Side. Expensive real estate, the kind of place where people minded their own business and security cameras watched every entrance. "How long was I unconscious?" "About 12 hours. You were more resistant to the sedative than I expected." He moved to join her at the window, close enough that she could smell that cedar scent again. "Must be good genetics. You drugged me." The words hung between them, an accusation and a statement of fact. "I protected you." His reflection in the window showed no trace of remorse. "There were 3 men following you from Penn Station. They would have taken you within 2 blocks of your aunt's address." "What men? I don't understand any of this." "The same men who've been watching you for weeks. The ones who killed Sister Margaret." The world seemed to stop. Sister Margaret had died of a heart attack, sudden but not unexpected for a woman of 78 who'd spent her life caring for orphan children. The doctor had been very clear about that. "You're lying." "Am I?" He turned to face her directly. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, did anyone else see the letter your aunt sent? Did you tell anyone about your plans to come to New York?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Sister Margaret had been the only one who knew about the letter, the only one Evangeline had trusted with her plans to leave the convent. They'd discussed it the night before Sister Margaret died, sitting in the small office where the nun handled all the paperwork for the girls in her care. "Sister Margaret was the kindest woman I ever knew. She raised me from the time I was 3 years old. She would never what? Sell information about you to the highest bidder." His voice softened, but not with kindness. "People do terrible things when they're desperate, Miss Thorne. Even good people. No, but doubt crept in like poison." Sister Margaret had been worried about something in those last weeks, distracted during prayers, jumpy when the phone rang. Evangeline had assumed it was her health, but what if it had been something else? "Your Aunt Celeste disappeared 15 years ago with something that belonged to my family. Something worth considerably more than $20 million. The people looking for you believe you know where she is. But I don't know where she is. I've never even met her. I know that. You know that. But they don't care about the truth. They care about leverage." He walked back to the bar cart and picked up his glass. "Which is why you're going to stay here until we figure out how to keep you alive." The casual way he said it made her skin crawl. "I'm not staying anywhere. I'm leaving right now." She started toward what she hoped was the door, but he moved faster than she'd expected. His hand closed around her wrist, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. "Look out that window again," he said quietly. See the black sedan parked across the street? The man in the gray suit reading a newspaper at the coffee cart? The woman walking the same poodle she's walked past this building 6 times since sunrise. Evangeline looked, and her heart sank. Now that he'd pointed them out, they were obvious. Too obvious, like actors who'd forgotten they were supposed to be invisible. They're waiting for you to run. The moment you step outside this building alone, you'll disappear. And unlike my methods, theirs don't involve sedatives and silk pajamas. She pulled her wrist free and wrapped her arms around herself. The silk suddenly felt thin and insubstantial, like everything else in her life that had seemed solid yesterday. What do you want from me? I want to find your aunt. I want back what she took. And I want to make sure you survive long enough to help me do both. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a soft clink. In exchange, I'll keep you safe, give you answers about your family, and make sure you inherit what's rightfully yours. And if I refuse, then I'll have Helena pack you a bag, and you can take your chances with the people downstairs. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But somehow, I don't think you're quite ready to die for principles you don't understand. Helena stepped forward with a breakfast tray, setting it on a small table by the windows as if kidnapping and extortion were perfectly normal parts of her morning routine. Your visitors will be here at 2, Darius said, straightening his tie. I suggest you eat something and get dressed. They're going to want to see that you're being well cared for. He headed toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Oh, and Miss Thorne, don't try to leave. The windows don't open. The elevator requires a key card, and Helena used to work for some very unpleasant people before she came to me. She's quite good at preventing escape attempts. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Evangeline found herself alone with a woman who might or might not be a former assassin, and a breakfast tray that smelled like freedom was just another word for something she'd never really had. The dress Helena had chosen fit perfectly, which bothered Evangeline more than it should have. Black wool that hugged her curves without being inappropriate, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her height and made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Darius was waiting in what he called the study, though it looked more like a war room. Maps covered one wall, marked with red pins and connecting strings. Photos were scattered across a massive desk, some recent, others yellowed with age. He'd changed into a charcoal suit that made his eyes look even more like storm clouds. Much better, he said without looking up from a file he was reading. You clean up well, Miss Thorne. Don't. She moved closer to the desk, trying to see what had captured his attention. I'm not your doll to dress up for your business meetings. No, you're not. He closed the file and met her eyes. You're bait. The word hit her like a slap. Excuse me. The people coming today aren't my associates. They're competitors. They want what your aunt took just as badly as I do, and they're willing to pay handsomely for information about you. He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. They're also willing to kill for it. Then why are you? Because they need to see that you're alive and healthy. They need to believe I'm protecting you because you're valuable to me. He turned back to her, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. Which, in a way, you are. Evangeline sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Everything she thought she understood kept shifting beneath her feet like quicksand. Tell me about my aunt. Tell me about this thing she supposedly stole. Darius was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Finally, he pulled a photograph from the pile on his desk and handed it to her. The woman in the picture could have been Evangeline's twin, if Evangeline had been born 30 years earlier and learned to wear confidence like armor. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw. But where Evangeline had spent her life in simple dresses and sensible shoes, this woman wore diamonds and silk like they were her birthright. Celeste Whitmore, Darius said, though she went by several other names depending on who she was running from at the time. She looks like me. The family resemblance is striking. It's part of what made you so easy to identify. He took the photo back, handling it like it might bite him. Your aunt was what some people might call a grifter. Others would use less polite terms. A thief, among other things. She had a talent for finding wealthy men with more money than sense and convincing them to part with both. His jaw tightened. My father was one of those men. The pieces began forming a picture Evangeline didn't want to see. She stole money from your family. She stole more than money. She stole trust, security, peace of mind. He moved to another wall where more photos hung in neat rows. These were older, formal family portraits in expensive frames. She was with my father for 2 years, long enough to learn all our secrets, gain access to our accounts, and discover where we kept the things that matter most. Evangeline joined him at the wall, studying the faces of people who looked like they'd never known a day of uncertainty in their lives. What things? Bearer bonds. Untraceable, unregistered, worth $50 million. His finger traced the edge of one frame, a photo of a man who shared his eyes and stubborn chin. My grandfather acquired them during some particularly creative business dealings in the 80s. Not entirely legal, but not entirely illegal either. Gray area money. The kind that could destroy a reputation if it came to light. The kind that could send people to prison if the wrong investigators started asking questions. He turned away from the photos. When Celeste disappeared, she took those bonds with her. She also took something else. The way he said it made her skin crawl. What? Evidence of every illegal thing my family had ever done. Photos, documents, recorded conversations. Insurance, she called it, in case we ever tried to come after her. His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. She was always very thorough. And you think I know where she is? I think you're the key to finding her. Blood calls to blood, Miss Thorne. And right now, you're the only blood relative she has left alive. The words hit her like ice water. What do you mean, the only one left alive? Darius pulled another file from his desk, this one thinner than the first. Your parents, Michael and Sarah Thorne, died in a car accident when you were 3. Your aunt was supposed to take custody of you, but she disappeared instead. You ended up at St. Catherine's because there was no one else. That's not true. Sister Margaret said my parents died and there was no other family. Sister Margaret lied. He handed her the file. Or at least, she didn't tell you the whole truth. Your aunt paid the convent a substantial sum to keep you hidden and safe. She's been sending money for your care every year since you arrived. Evangeline's hands shook as she opened the file. Bank records, money transfers, letters written in handwriting she didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. All of it painting a picture of a woman who'd been watching from the shadows, making sure Evangeline was fed and clothed and educated, but never getting close enough to put her in danger. She cared about you, Darius said quietly, in her own way, but she cared about staying alive more. Why are you telling me this? Why not just hold me prisoner until she contacts you? Because she won't contact me. She's too smart for that. He moved to the window again, watching the street below. But she will contact you. Eventually. And when she does, I'll be ready. A soft chime echoed through the apartment, and Helena appeared in the doorway. Mr. Ashford, your guests have arrived. Already? They're early. He straightened his tie and checked his watch. Send them up in 5 minutes. I want them to wait. Helena nodded and disappeared, leaving them alone with the weight of revelations and the approaching storm of whatever came next. What do I say to them? Evangeline asked. As little as possible. Let me do the talking. He moved closer to her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. And whatever they offer you, whatever they promise, remember that they killed Sister Margaret just to send a message. They have no intention of letting you live once they get what they want. What about you? Do you intend to let me live? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. When he answered, his voice was softer than she'd heard it yet. Ask me again when this is over. The elevator chimed in the distance, and footsteps echoed in the hallway. Evangeline smoothed her dress and tried to look like the kind of person who belonged in a room full of people who solved problems with violence and money. Remember, Darius said as the footsteps grew closer, you're worth more to them alive than dead. For now, the door opened, and 3 people entered like wolves circling prey. The game was about to begin, and Evangeline wasn't sure she knew the rules well enough to survive it. The first man through the door looked like he collected debts for a living. 6.5 feet of muscle wrapped in an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the gun holstered under his left arm. His companion was smaller, sharper, with the kind of pale eyes that suggested he enjoyed his work a little too much. But it was the woman who made Evangeline's skin crawl. She moved like silk over steel, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. Her red hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her smile could have cut glass. When she looked at Evangeline, It felt like being examined by a predator deciding whether you were worth the effort to kill. Victoria Sterling, she said, extending a manicured hand. I've heard so much about you, dear. Evangeline shook the offered hand, surprised by how cold it was. I wish I could say the same. Oh, we'll remedy that soon enough. Victoria settled into one of the leather chairs as if she owned the place. Marcus, James, please make yourselves comfortable. The two men remained standing, positioning themselves near the windows and door respectively. Standard intimidation tactics, the kind designed to make it clear that leaving wasn't an option. Drink? Darius asked, moving to the bar cart with the casual ease of a man entertaining old friends. Scotch. Neat, Victoria replied. The 18-year Macallan, if you have it. Of course. He poured 3 glasses, handed one to Victoria, kept one for himself, and offered the third to Evangeline. She shook her head, needing to keep her wits sharp. Now then, Victoria said after taking a sip that she clearly savored. Let's discuss our mutual problem. I wasn't aware we had a mutual problem, Darius replied smoothly. Oh, but we do. You see, you have something that belongs to us. Victoria's gaze shifted to Evangeline like a laser finding its target. Or rather, someone. Miss Thorne is my guest. Miss Thorne is Celeste Whitmore's niece, which makes her our business. Victoria crossed her legs, the picture of casual menace. We've invested considerable time and resources tracking down leads to that particular woman. Imagine our surprise when we discovered she had living family. What do you want with my aunt? Evangeline asked before she could stop herself. Victoria's smile widened. The same thing Mr. Ashford wants, I suspect. Justice. Justice. Evangeline looked between them, confusion and growing dread warring in her chest. Your aunt killed my brother, Victoria said simply. Shot him in the back and left him to bleed out in a warehouse in Queens. All for a briefcase full of documents that belonged to my family. That's not possible. But even as she said it, Evangeline remembered the hardness in Celeste's eyes in the photograph, the way she'd worn those diamonds like armor. Isn't it? Tell me, dear, what exactly do you know about your loving aunt? Did you know she's wanted in 7 countries? Did you know she's suspected in at least 12 deaths? Did you know that every person who's ever trusted her has ended up either dead or wishing they were? Each question hit like a physical blow. Evangeline sank into the chair across from Victoria, the weight of revelations crushing down on her. You're lying. Am I? Mr. Ashford, would you care to confirm the details of your father's death? Darius's knuckles went white around his glass. My father's death was ruled a suicide. After your precious Celeste convinced him that bankruptcy and prison were his only alternatives. After she'd systematically destroyed his business relationships and drained his accounts. After she'd made it clear that everyone he loved would pay the price for his mistakes. Victoria's voice remained conversational, but venom dripped from every word. Yes, technically he pulled the trigger himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Evangeline looked at Darius, seeing the pain he'd been hiding behind cold professionalism. His father hadn't just been robbed. He'd been broken so thoroughly that death seemed like mercy. What do you want from me? Evangeline whispered. The same thing we've always wanted. Information about where she is. Access to the accounts she's been using to stay hidden. And eventually, the woman herself. Victoria leaned forward, her pale eyes intense. You see, dear, your aunt made one crucial mistake. She allowed herself to care about someone. She doesn't care about me. I've never even met her. Haven't you? Are you sure about that? Victoria pulled out a tablet and swiped through several photos. These were taken at St. Catherine's over the years. Security cameras, traffic cameras, even a few tourist photos from people visiting the area. The photos showed a woman in various disguises, always at a distance, always watching. Sometimes she was an older woman feeding pigeons in the park across from the convent. Sometimes she was a jogger running past the gates. In one particularly clear shot, she was a delivery driver, and her face was unmistakably the same as the woman in Darius's photograph. She's been watching you your entire life, Victoria continued. Making sure you were safe, making sure you had everything you needed. Love makes people do foolish things, and your aunt has been very foolish indeed. How do you know all this? Because we've been watching her watch you, waiting for the right moment to make our move. Victoria finished her scotch and set the glass aside. The moment you left the convent, we knew she'd have to surface. Blood calls to blood, as they say. Darius moved to stand behind Evangeline's chair, his presence both protective and possessive. What's your offer, Victoria? Simple. We take the girl, use her as bait to draw Celeste out of hiding, and everyone gets what they want. You get your bonds back, I get my brother's killer, and the world becomes a safer place. And what happens to me? Evangeline asked. That depends entirely on how cooperative your aunt proves to be. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evangeline felt Darius's hand settle on her shoulder, surprisingly warm and reassuring. I'm afraid that's not acceptable, he said quietly. Victoria's smile turned predatory. I wasn't really asking for your permission, Mr. Ashford. Marcus? The big man moved toward them, but Darius was faster. Something silver flashed in his hand, and Marcus stumbled backward with blood streaming from a cut across his cheek. I think this meeting is over, Darius said, the blade still gleaming between his fingers. Indeed it is. Victoria stood gracefully, apparently unconcerned that one of her men was bleeding. But this isn't finished. The girl is the key to everything, and we will have her, one way or another. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. Victoria paused at the door, looking back at Evangeline with something that might have been pity. Your aunt destroyed everyone who ever loved her, dear. Don't let her destroy you too. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Evangeline and Darius alone with the echo of threats and the smell of blood in the air. Are you all right? He asked, kneeling beside her chair. No. She looked up at him, seeing her own fear reflected in his storm-cloud eyes. I'm really not all right at all. Neither am I. He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle despite the violence they'd just witnessed. But we're going to figure this out. Together. Why? Why are you protecting me when you could just hand me over to them? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing it. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to explore. Outside, New York continued its relentless pace, unaware that in one apartment high above the streets, two people were falling towards something that might be love or might be destruction. At this point, it was impossible to tell the difference. The phone rang at 3 a.m, jarring Evangeline from dreams filled with red-haired women and silver knives. She'd been sleeping in the guest room for 2 weeks now, and the sound still made her heart race. Nothing good ever came from calls at that hour. She heard Darius answer in his room down the hall, his voice sharp with tension. The conversation was brief, punctuated by long silences that somehow felt more ominous than shouting would have been. When it ended, she heard his footsteps in the corridor. A soft knock came at her door. Evangeline, I need to speak with you. She wrapped a robe around herself and opened the door to find him standing there in just pajama pants, his hair disheveled and his expression grim. Even exhausted and worried, he was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight. What's wrong? We need to talk. All of it, this time. No more half-truths. He ran a hand through his dark hair. That was my contact at the FBI. They found Sister Margaret's body. The words hit her like ice water. What do you mean, found her body? She was buried. I went to her funeral. You went to the funeral of an unidentified woman who died of a heart attack. Sister Margaret was murdered 3 days before that, and her body was dumped in the Hudson River. His voice was gentle, but the truth still felt like a physical blow. They identified her through dental records. Evangeline sank onto the edge of the bed, the world tilting around her. But I saw her. The night before she died, we talked about my leaving. She was worried, but she was alive. What exactly did she say to you? She asked if I was sure about going to find Celeste. She said some secrets were better left buried. Evangeline looked up at him, pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. She knew, didn't she? She knew what my aunt had done. She knew enough to be scared. The question is, did she tell anyone about your plans? I don't know. Maybe. There was a man who came to see her that afternoon, someone from the diocese. She seemed upset after he left. The memory felt different now, tainted with new understanding. Oh God, did I get her killed? No. Darius sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Celeste got her killed, just like she's gotten everyone else killed. Tell me everything. I'm tired of lies and half-truths and people deciding what I can handle. She turned to face him fully. I want to know exactly what my aunt did to your family." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands as if the words were written there. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was 17 when she came into our lives. Beautiful, charming, everything my father thought he wanted after my mother died. She was supposed to be an art dealer, specializing in European acquisitions. Very cultured, very sophisticated. But she wasn't. She was a con artist with a talent for research and a gift for becoming exactly what her targets needed her to be. My father was lonely, vulnerable, still grieving. She made him feel alive again." His jaw tightened. For 2 years, she was the perfect girlfriend. Supportive, understanding, never pushing for more than he was ready to give. What changed? I did. I started asking questions about her past, her work, the stories that never quite added up. I was young and suspicious and protective of my father. He looked at her with something that might have been regret. I hired a private investigator. Evangeline felt her stomach drop. "What did you find?" "That Celeste Whitmore didn't exist before she met my father. That the woman in our house had been Margaret Shun, then Isabella Rodriguez, then Sarah Newman. That everywhere she went, wealthy men ended up dead or bankrupt." His voice grew harder with each word. "And that she'd been systematically transferring money from our accounts to offshore holdings for months." "Did you tell your father?" "I tried. But by then, she'd convinced him that I was jealous, that I couldn't accept another woman in my mother's place. She was very good at playing the victim." He stood and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with old pain. "The night I showed him the evidence, she was ready for it." "Ready how?" "She had recordings of every illegal business deal my father had ever made. Photos of bribes being paid, contracts being signed, people being threatened. 20 years of carefully documented evidence that could have sent him to prison for life." Darius's reflection in the window looked like a man carved from stone. She gave him a choice. Let her leave with the bonds and the evidence, or watch his son go to prison along with him. "She used you against him." "She was very thorough. Half the evidence implicated me as well, made it look like I was his partner rather than his victim. My father couldn't risk my future for his money." His laugh was bitter. "So he let her go. But that wasn't enough for her." "No, it wasn't. 3 months later, copies of those documents started showing up in the hands of our competitors, our clients, the media. Our business collapsed overnight. Our reputation was destroyed. My father lost everything he'd spent his life building." Evangeline closed her eyes, imagining the systematic destruction of a life, the careful dismantling of hope and pride and purpose. And then he killed himself. He lasted 6 months. 6 months of watching everything fall apart, of knowing that he'd been played by a woman who'd never felt anything for him but contempt. When Darius turned from the window, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. The night he died, she sent him a letter. Just one line. "Thank you for the education." The cruelty of it took her breath away. My God. So yes, I wanted revenge. Yes, I planned to use you to find her. And yes, I've spent the last 15 years of my life thinking about what I'd do to her when I finally caught up with her. He moved back to the bed, kneeling in front of her so they were eye to eye. "But that was before I knew you. Knew what about me? That you're nothing like her. That you're kind and honest and brave in ways she could never understand. That you've spent your life taking care of other people instead of destroying them." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "That I've fallen in love with you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Evangeline felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the warmth of his touch burning through her skin. "You can't love me," she whispered. "I'm just a reminder of everything she took from you. You're not a reminder of anything. You're the first real thing I've felt since my father died." His voice was rough with emotion. "And that terrifies me more than anything Victoria Sterling could ever threaten. Darius, I know it's impossible. I know it's complicated beyond belief. I know that my feelings don't change what I have to do." He pulled his hands away from her face, the loss of contact like a physical ache. "But I needed you to know the truth. All of it. What do you have to do? Find your aunt. Get back what she stole. Make sure Victoria and her people can never use you to hurt anyone else." He stood, putting distance between them again. "And then let you go. What if I don't want to go?" The question escaped before she could stop it, hanging in the air between them like a confession. Darius stared at her, something desperate and hungry flickering in his storm cloud eyes. Don't, he said quietly. Don't make this harder than it already is. Why? Because it's easier to pretend this is just business? Because it's safer to keep lying to ourselves about what's happening here? Because I don't deserve you. Because I kidnapped you and lied to you and used you as bait. Because everything good in your life has been destroyed by my need for revenge. That's not true, isn't it? Sister Margaret is dead because of me. You're in danger because of me. Your entire world has been turned upside down because I couldn't let go of the past. Evangeline stood, closing the distance between them until she could feel his breath against her skin. And what about what I want? Don't I get a say in any of this? What you want doesn't matter if it gets you killed. Everything gets you killed eventually. The question is whether you live first. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the rapid pulse at his throat. I've spent 22 years in a convent, Darius. Safe, protected, isolated from anything that might hurt me. Do you know what that's like? To be so afraid of pain that you never risk feeling anything at all. Evangeline, I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting other people decide what's best for me. And I'm tired of pretending I don't feel something for you that scares me more than Victoria Sterling ever could. The admission hung between them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. When he kissed her, it felt like falling and flying at the same time, like everything she'd been afraid of and everything she'd been hoping for wrapped up in the taste of his mouth and the desperate way his hands tangled in her hair. When they broke apart, both of them breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he whispered. I know. This makes everything more dangerous. I know that too. And I still have to find her. I still have to finish this. Then we'll finish it together. Outside, dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, and somewhere in the city, the forces that wanted to destroy them were already moving. But for this moment, in this room, they had something that felt like hope. It would have to be enough. The coffee shop on 47th Street looked innocent enough. Red brick facade, cheerful yellow awnings, the kind of place where tourists grabbed overpriced lattes before heading to Times Square. Evangeline sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the entrance for any sign of trouble. Darius had been gone for 3 days, following a lead that supposedly traced back to one of Celeste's old aliases. He'd left her with Helena, a stack of emergency cash, and strict instructions not to leave the apartment under any circumstances. She'd lasted exactly 18 hours before the walls started closing in. The letter had arrived that morning, slipped under the apartment door while Helena was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Plain white envelope, no return address. Her name written in handwriting that made her chest tight with recognition. My dearest Evangeline, it had read. I know you must have questions. Meet me at Gramercy Coffee, 2 p.m. Come alone, or don't come at all. We have so little time left. See, she'd stared at those words for 20 minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs. Celeste was here, in New York, close enough to slip letters under doors. Close enough to finally provide the answers that everyone seemed to want to keep from her. The decision to come had been impulsive, reckless, exactly the kind of thing Darius would have forbidden if he'd been there to ask. But she was tired of being protected, tired of having her life managed by people who thought they knew what was best for her. If her aunt wanted to meet, then they would meet. A shadow fell across her table, and she looked up to see a woman sliding into the seat across from her. At first glance, she looked nothing like the photographs Evangeline had seen. Gray hair cut short and practical, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of unremarkable middle-aged woman who could disappear in any crowd. But the eyes were unmistakable, green like her own, sharp with intelligence and something that might have been regret. Hello, sweetheart. Celeste's voice was softer than she'd expected, touched with an accent that suggested years of living in different places. You look so much like your mother. You look different than your pictures. I've had a lot of practice being different people. Celeste signaled the waitress for coffee, her movements careful and controlled. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Evangeline studied her aunt's face, looking for signs of the monster everyone had described. Everyone seems to think you're dangerous. Everyone is right. Celeste's smile was sad. I am dangerous, Evangeline. To myself, to you, to anyone who gets too close to me. That's why I stayed away for so long. But you've been watching me. From a distance. making sure you were safe, making sure you had what you needed. It was the best I could do without putting you at risk. Like Sister Margaret was at risk. Celeste's face went very still. You know about that. I know she was murdered. I know it happened because she knew about my connection to you. Anger flared in Evangeline's chest, hot and righteous. Did you know they were going to kill her? If I had known, I would have stopped it. Celeste leaned forward, her voice urgent. Margaret was a good woman who didn't deserve what happened to her. But she made a mistake, sweetheart. She trusted the wrong person with information about you. What person? The man from the diocese who came to see her. Except he wasn't from the diocese at all. He was working for Victoria Sterling, trying to confirm that you were planning to leave the convent. Celeste's hands were steady on her coffee cup, but Evangeline could see the tension in her shoulders. They've been watching you for months, waiting for the right moment to make their move. And what about Darius? Is he one of the good guys or one of the bad guys? That's complicated. Celeste was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Darius Ashford has every reason to hate me. I destroyed his family, and I've never tried to justify that or make excuses for it. But he's not like the others. He won't hurt you to get to me. How can you be sure? Because if he wanted to hurt you, you'd already be dead. Celeste reached across the table and covered Evangeline's hand with her own. And because I've seen the way he looks at you. You've been watching us? I've been watching everyone who might pose a threat to you. Victoria's people, Darius, even the FBI agents who think they're being clever. Her grip tightened slightly. The situation is deteriorating faster than I expected. That's why I had to risk meeting with you. What situation? Victoria has hired additional muscle. Professional killers, the kind who don't ask questions about collateral damage. She's planning to take you within the next 48 hours, and she doesn't care how many people get hurt in the process. The words sent ice through Evangeline's veins. Then we need to warn Darius. Darius can take care of himself. It's you I'm worried about. Celeste pulled a small device from her purse, something that looked like a modified cell phone. This is a GPS tracker that will lead you to a safe house I've prepared. Food, money, new documents, everything you need to disappear. I'm not running away. You have to. It's the only way to keep you alive. No. Evangeline pulled her hand free, anger flaring again. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people pay the price for choices I had nothing to do with. If Victoria wants me, she can come and get me. You don't understand what these people are capable of. Then explain it to me. Tell me exactly what you did that was so terrible it's worth killing innocent people 15 years later. Celeste was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with memory. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I fell in love with the wrong man. Darius's father? James Ashford was everything I thought I wanted. Wealthy, powerful, sophisticated. But he was also involved in things that could have destroyed a lot of innocent people. She looked up at Evangeline, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. I told myself I was doing the right thing when I gathered evidence against him. I told myself someone had to stop him. But that wasn't really why you did it. No, I did it because I was angry and hurt and tired of being treated like a pretty accessory instead of a partner. I wanted to prove that I was just as smart as he was, just as capable of playing the game. Her laugh was bitter. I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. And then what? You just took the money and ran? I took the money because I needed leverage to keep Victoria and her people from coming after me. The Sterling family was James's biggest competitor, and they would have killed me just for knowing what I knew about their operations. Celeste leaned forward, her voice urgent. The bonds I took weren't just worth $50 million, Evangeline. They were proof of every illegal transaction, every bribe, every murder that family had committed over 3 decades. So you've been blackmailing them all these years. I've been staying alive. There's a difference. Celeste checked her watch, anxiety flickering across her features. But the balance is shifting. Victoria is desperate enough now to risk everything, and that makes her more dangerous than ever. Then we end this. We give her what she wants and walk away. It's not that simple. Even if I gave her the bonds, even if I turned over every piece of evidence I have, she'd still kill us both. Some secrets are too dangerous to leave witnesses alive. A chill ran down Evangeline's spine as she realized the truth of it. They weren't just caught in a game of greed and revenge. They were caught in a war where the only acceptable outcome was total victory or total destruction. There has to be another way. There is. Celeste reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a flash drive. Everything is on here. Every crime, every murder, every illegal deal that Victoria and her family have ever made. Enough evidence to put her away for the rest of her life. Then why haven't you used it? Because using it means giving up the only protection I have. The moment this information becomes public, I become a liability instead of an asset. Celeste pressed the drive into Evangeline's palm. But if something happens to me, if Victoria gets her hands on me, I need to know that someone will make sure the truth comes out. Nothing's going to happen to you. Something's already happening. Celeste nodded toward the window, where two men in dark suits were approaching the coffee shop. They found us. Evangeline's blood turned to ice as she recognized one of the faces. Marcus, Victoria's enforcer, the man Darius had cut in his apartment. His cheek still bore the thin white line of a healing scar. Back exit, Celeste said quietly, standing with practiced calm. Go straight to the alley, then head north. Don't look back, don't stop, don't trust anyone who tries to help you. What about you? I'll buy you some time. Celeste smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the woman in the photographs, beautiful and dangerous and utterly fearless. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. And remember that everything I did because I love you. The words hit Evangeline like a physical blow, but there was no time to process them. Marcus was through the front door now, his pale eyes scanning the crowd with predatory focus. In seconds, he would spot them. Evangeline clutched the flash drive and ran for the back of the coffee shop, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she heard the crash of overturning tables and the sharp crack of breaking glass. A woman screamed, then another, and then the sound was cut off by something that might have been gunfire. She burst through the back exit into an alley that smelled of garbage and rain, her legs carrying her north without conscious thought. Behind her, the sounds of violence grew louder, more desperate, and she knew with sick certainty that Celeste was buying her escape with blood. The flash drive felt like it was burning a hole in her palm. Whatever was on it, whatever secrets her aunt had been keeping, they were hers now, along with the responsibility of deciding what to do with them. She ran through the maze of Manhattan streets, her expensive heels clicking against wet pavement, and tried not to think about the fact that she was completely alone in a city full of people who wanted her dead. The warehouse in Queens looked like it had been abandoned since the Carter administration. Broken windows stared out like dead eyes, and rust bloomed across the corrugated metal walls like some industrial disease. Evangeline crouched behind a dumpster across the street, her dress torn and dirty from 3 hours of running through back alleys and subway tunnels, trying to stay one step ahead of Victoria's hunters. The flash drive in her pocket felt heavier than lead. She tried calling Darius a dozen times, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Helena wasn't answering either, which meant they'd either been taken or were smart enough to stay hidden. Either way, she was on her own. The text message had come 20 minutes ago, sent from a number she didn't recognize. Your aunt is here. Come alone, or she dies slowly. You have 1 hour. She'd known it was a trap. Victoria wasn't the type to honor bargains or show mercy to witnesses. But the alternative was letting Celeste die for sins that belonged to both of them, and that wasn't something she could live with. Movement in one of the warehouse windows caught her attention. A figure passed by the broken glass, tall and lean, moving with familiar predatory grace. Her heart clenched as she recognized the silhouette. Darius was already inside. Either he'd received the same message she had, or this was part of whatever plan he'd been working on during his 3-day absence. Either way, his presence changed everything. She wasn't alone anymore, which meant she had a chance of getting out of this alive. The front entrance was too obvious, too exposed. She circled the building, looking for another way in, and found a loading dock at the rear with a door that hung slightly ajar. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, but it would have to do. She slipped inside and found herself in a maze of shadows and rust-stained concrete. The warehouse was bigger than it had looked from the outside, divided into sections by metal barriers and abandoned machinery. Voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, too distant to make out words but close enough to follow. She moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She'd lost her shoes somewhere during the chase through Central Park, and the concrete bit into her soles with every step. But the pain kept her focused, kept her moving forward when every instinct screamed at her to run. The voices grew louder as she approached what had once been the main assembly floor. Through a gap in the metal sheeting, she could see lights strung from the ceiling and several figures gathered in a rough circle. Her breath caught in her throat as she spotted Celeste. Her aunt was tied to a metal chair in the center of the space, her gray hair matted with blood and her clothes torn. But she was alive, conscious, her green eyes blazing with defiance even as Victoria circled her like a shark scenting blood. "I have to admit, you're tougher than I expected," Victoria was saying, her red hair gleaming under the harsh lights. "Most people would have broken by now." "Most people don't have as much practice with disappointment," Celeste replied, her voice steady despite the obvious pain. "Where are the bonds, Celeste? Where are the documents? You're going to tell me eventually, so why not save us both some time? Because watching you squirm is the most fun I've had in years." Victoria's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Still playing the tough girl. How refreshing." She nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward with something that gleamed silver in his hand. "Perhaps you'll be more cooperative after we discuss the many ways your niece can suffer. She's not part of this." "Oh, but she is. The moment you decided to watch over her, you made her part of this. Blood for blood, isn't that how these things work?" Evangeline's hands clenched into fists. She had to do something, had to act before Victoria's patience ran out completely. But she was one person against at least four that she could see, and she had no weapons except the flash drive in her pocket. A hand settled on her shoulder, and she spun around with her heart in her throat. Darius stood behind her, his face grim but his eyes blazing with something that looked like relief. "Thank God you're all right," he whispered, pulling her against him for a brief, desperate embrace. "When I got back and found you gone, when Helena told me about the letter, how did you know to come here? I've been tracking Victoria's people for days. This warehouse belongs to one of her shell companies." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, but we have to help Celeste." "I know." His expression grew harder. "But this ends tonight, Evangeline. All of it. No matter what it costs." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. "What are you planning?" "Justice." He handed her a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. "Emergency beacon. If things go wrong, if we get separated, press the red button. Federal agents will be here in 5 minutes." "Federal agents?" "I've been working with them for months, gathering evidence against Victoria and her organization. This warehouse is surrounded, but they can't move until we get your aunt clear." His jaw tightened. Victoria Sterling is about to learn that some debts can't be paid with blood. Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving, slipping through the shadows with the silent grace of a predator. She watched him position himself near what looked like a circuit breaker, then disappear behind a stack of crates. A moment later, the lights went out. The warehouse plunged into darkness, and chaos erupted immediately. Shouts, the crash of overturning furniture, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing off concrete walls. Evangeline pressed herself against the metal sheeting, heart hammering, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the gloom. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a hellish red glow. She could see figures moving, struggling, but the shadows made it impossible to tell friend from foe. Then she heard Celeste cry out, a sound of pain that cut through the confusion like a blade. She ran toward the sound without thinking, abandoning cover and caution in favor of speed. The flash drive bounced in her pocket as she sprinted across the open floor, dodging between pillars and abandoned machinery. She found Celeste still tied to the chair, but Victoria was nowhere to be seen. Marcus lay unconscious nearby, blood pooling beneath his head. Her aunt's eyes were wide with pain and something that looked like pride. "You shouldn't have come," Celeste said as Evangeline worked at the ropes binding her wrists. "Neither should you, but here we are." The knots were tight, designed by someone who knew what they were doing. "Can you walk?" "I think so. But Evangeline, you need to know something. Victoria isn't just after the bonds anymore. She's after—" The words were cut off by the cold press of metal against Evangeline's temple. She froze, her hands still tangled in the rope, as Victoria's voice whispered in her ear. "How touching. A family reunion." The gun barrel dug deeper into her skin. "Step away from her, dear." Slowly. Evangeline did as she was told, raising her hands as she turned to face Victoria. The other woman looked different in the red emergency lighting, older and more desperate. her perfect composure finally cracking under the weight of 15 years of failure. "Where's Darius?" Evangeline asked. "Dealing with my remaining associates. Don't worry, you'll see him soon enough." Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife. "Just in time to watch you die. You got what you wanted. Celeste is here, helpless. Take your revenge, and let me go." "But that's where you're wrong, dear. This was never about revenge. This was about survival." Victoria pulled a second gun from her jacket, keeping one trained on Evangeline while pointing the other at Celeste. "Your aunt made the mistake of thinking she was the only one with insurance policies. I don't understand. The bonds she stole, the evidence she's been holding over my head, it's all worthless now. Times change, statutes of limitations expire, people die. But what she recorded in those early days, what she witnessed." Victoria's eyes glittered with desperate cunning. "That's still dangerous. Still worth killing for." "What did she witness?" "The murder of a federal judge. The assassination of a senator who asked too many questions. Events that certain people in very high places would prefer to keep buried." Victoria's grip tightened on both guns. "People who've promised me significant compensation for ensuring that all witnesses are permanently silenced." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't about old grudges or stolen money. This was about eliminating loose ends, cleaning up messes that powerful people couldn't afford to have exposed. "You're going to kill us both. I'm going to make it look like a tragic accident. A family reunion gone wrong. Violence between criminals that spiraled out of control. Very sad, very final, very profitable for everyone involved." A shadow moved behind Victoria, and Evangeline's heart leaped. Darius emerged from the darkness like an avenging angel, blood streaming from a cut above his left eye, but very much alive. He moved with deadly purpose, closing the distance between himself and Victoria with silent steps. "The only problem with your plan," he said quietly, "is that you forgot about the recording devices." Victoria spun toward him, both guns swinging in his direction, but she was a fraction of a second too slow. Darius hit her like a freight train, driving her to the ground in a tangle of limbs and desperation. The guns went flying, skittering across the concrete into the shadows. They fought with vicious intensity, rolling across the floor, each trying to gain the advantage. Victoria was faster than she looked, trained in ways that surprised even Darius. But he had rage on his side, 15 years of grief and anger focused into pure violence. Evangeline lunged for one of the fallen guns, her fingers closing around the grip just as Victoria broke free from Darius's hold. The other woman came up with something silver in her hand, a knife that gleamed in the red light. "Victoria, stop!" Evangeline shouted, pointing the gun with hands that shook despite her best efforts. Victoria turned toward her, the knife balanced perfectly in her grip, and smiled. "You don't have it in you, dear. You're too good, too pure, too much like your precious aunt." "Maybe," Evangeline said quietly, "but I'm also tired of letting other people die for me." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Victoria looked down at the spreading red stain on her white blouse with something that might have been surprise, then crumpled to the concrete without another word. The silence that followed was deafening. Evangeline stared at the gun in her hands, at the woman who would never hurt anyone again, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. "It's over," Darius said, moving to take the weapon from her trembling fingers. "It's finally over." But as sirens wailed in the distance and federal agents swarmed the warehouse, Evangeline wondered if anything was ever really over, or if some shadows were too deep to ever fully escape. 6 months later, Evangeline stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was now their apartment, watching snowflakes dance against the glass like tiny ballerinas. The view of Central Park looked different in winter, softer somehow, as if the snow had gentled all the sharp edges of the city. Behind her, she could hear Darius moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of coffee cups and the rustle of newspaper pages. Normal sounds from a normal morning in what had become their beautifully normal life. It still amazed her sometimes, how ordinary happiness could feel after everything they'd been through. The physical scars had healed quickly. The cut above Darius's eye had left only a thin silver line that she liked to trace with her fingertip when he was sleeping. Her own wounds had been mostly internal, the kind that time and love could mend if you let them. The legal aftermath had taken longer to resolve. Weeks of depositions and testimonies, federal agents asking the same questions in different ways, lawyers explaining why some truths were too complicated for public consumption. In the end, the official story was remarkably simple. Victoria Sterling had been killed while resisting arrest during a raid on her criminal organization. Case closed, justice served, everyone could move on with their lives. The unofficial story was more complex, but it was also more honest. The flash drive Celeste had given her contained enough evidence to destroy dozens of careers and topple several major corporations. Instead of releasing it all at once, the federal prosecutors had used it strategically, making deals with smaller fish to catch bigger ones, untangling a web of corruption that stretched back decades. Celeste herself had negotiated immunity in exchange for her testimony, though she'd made it clear that she had no intention of staying in one place long enough for old enemies to find her. She'd hugged Evangeline goodbye at the airport 3 weeks ago, promising to write, but warning that the letters might be few and far between. "Some of us aren't built for settling down," she'd said with a smile that looked exactly like Evangeline's own. "But some of us are. Make sure you choose the right life for yourself, sweetheart." Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her back against a chest that smelled like cedar and coffee and home. Darius rested his chin on top of her head, and she could feel him smiling against her hair. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is to be happy." She leaned into his warmth, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "Are you sure about this? About us? Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me instead of revenge." "I didn't choose you instead of revenge," he said quietly. "I chose you instead of emptiness. Instead of spending the rest of my life defined by anger and loss." His arms tightened around her. "Besides, revenge is overrated. Love is much more interesting." She turned in his arms to face him, studying the face that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The storm cloud eyes were warmer now, more gray than black, and the lines around them spoke of laughter as much as worry. "I love you," she said, because she could say it now without fear, without reservation, without wondering if the words would somehow make everything fall apart. "I love you too." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her mouth with the kind of tenderness that still made her knees weak. "Which is why I have something to ask you." "What kind of something?" Instead of answering, he pulled back and dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box from his pocket with the flourish of a man who'd been practicing the move for weeks. When he opened it, the diamond inside caught the winter light and threw rainbows across the walls. "Evangeline Thorne," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and absolutely inevitable. She stared down at him. This man who'd kidnapped her and lied to her and shown her what it meant to live without fear, and felt her heart expand until it seemed too big for her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood to kiss her with the kind of passion that made the rest of the world disappear. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard and grinning like idiots. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you want. Next year, if you need time to plan. Whenever you're ready to be stuck with me permanently." "I've been stuck with you since the moment I woke up in your apartment," she pointed out. "The rest is just paperwork. The most beautiful paperwork I've ever filed." They spent the morning making plans, discussing venues and guest lists and whether Helena should cater the reception. It was wonderfully mundane, the kind of conversation that couples had been having for centuries, and Evangeline treasured every moment of it. The phone rang just after lunch, interrupting their debate about whether spring or summer weddings were more romantic. Darius answered with one hand, while keeping the other wrapped around Evangeline's waist, as if he couldn't bear to let her go even for a phone call. "Ashford," he said, then went very still. "When? Are you sure?" "All right. Thank you for calling." He hung up with a frown, and Evangeline felt a familiar chill of fear run down her spine. "What's wrong?" "That was Agent Morrison. They found another body, someone who worked for Victoria. Shot execution style in a hotel room in Miami." His jaw tightened. "They think someone might be cleaning house, eliminating loose ends from her organization. Does that put us in danger?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably not, but..." He pulled her closer, as if physical contact could keep the shadows at bay. "I thought it was over. I thought we were safe." Maybe we are. Maybe this is just coincidence. Or maybe it's someone settling old scores that have nothing to do with us. She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. We can't live our lives waiting for the next threat, Darius. We'll drive ourselves crazy. I know. You're right. It's just hard to believe that we get to be happy after everything that happened. Believe it, she said firmly. We survived. We found each other. We chose love over fear and truth over lies. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. He kissed her again, slow and deep and full of promise, and she could feel some of the tension leaving his shoulders. They'd learned to live with uncertainty, to find peace in the spaces between storms. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was theirs. That evening, they had dinner with Helena, who had agreed to stay on as their housekeeper despite no longer needing to prevent escape attempts. She'd grown fond of them, she claimed, though Evangeline suspected the older woman simply enjoyed having people to take care of. You're good for each other, Helena said as she cleared the dessert plates. I wasn't sure at first, but you balance him. Make him remember that there's more to life than business and revenge. What about me? Do I balance her? Darius asked with a grin. You make her brave, Helena replied seriously. She was like a bird in a cage when she first came here, afraid to fly because she didn't know if the world was safe. Now she knows it isn't, but she flies anyway. Later, as they lay in bed watching the snow fall outside their window, Evangeline traced patterns on Darius's chest and thought about courage and choice and the strange paths that led people to exactly where they needed to be. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently? She asked. If there had been no kidnapping, no danger, no family secrets? Sometimes. But then I think we might have passed each other on the street and never looked twice. Sometimes it takes extraordinary circumstances to help ordinary people find extraordinary love. Is that what we have? Extraordinary love? Look at everything we survived to get here. Look at all the reasons we should have walked away from each other and didn't. If that's not extraordinary, I don't know what is. She smiled against his skin, tasting salt and satisfaction and the promise of all their tomorrows. Outside, the city hummed with 8 million stories, 8 million different ways that people found each other and lost each other and sometimes, if they were very lucky, found each other again. But inside their apartment, in their bed, with their future stretching out before them like an unwritten book, there was only their story. And it was exactly the story they'd chosen to tell. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, welcoming a new day. Evangeline Thorne fell asleep in the arms of the man who'd kidnapped her heart and given her a life worth living, and dreamed of white dresses and flower petals and the kind of happy ending that seemed impossible until it wasn't. Some stories ended with revenge. Some ended with justice. But the best stories, the ones worth telling, ended with love triumphant and two people brave enough to choose each other against all odds. This was one of those stories.